All right, passport ready. We're about to swap those winter coats for something a little more tropical.
Sounds good to me.
Today's deep dive, Hong Kong. Specifically, how to not just survive, but really thrive as an expat there.
I'm ready.
Our guide is Navigating Life as a Hong Kong Asia Expat, and it's packed with insights. I'm already hooked. This city, it's this amazing blend of East meets West. But gotta be honest, that can be a bit of a shock at first, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about the skyline and the food. It's a whole different way of life. Like getting used to the pace, the customs. It takes time.
And our guide really hammers that home.
Yeah.
Respect for local customs, it's
Yeah.
non-negotiable. Like, did you know a nod or slight bow is the standard greeting?
Yeah, forget the handshake unless they offer it first. And personal space, let's just say it's a little cozier.
Definitely good to know. And speaking of showing respect, the guide suggests learning some basic Cantonese.
More than just practical, it's about effort. Like you're trying to understand their culture, that goes a long way.
Even simple phrases like hello and thank you. I can see how that would make a difference. Now on to something that makes every expat nervous. Housing. And our guide doesn't sugarcoat it. Hong Kong's housing market, it's intense.
No kidding. High demand, limited space, and prices that'll make you do a double take. Renting is the norm, especially when you're first settling in. Gives you flexibility to figure out what neighborhood's your vibe.
And speaking of neighborhoods, this guide talks about serviced apartments.
Yeah.
Those sound pretty swanky.
They are. Think fully furnished apartments, but with those hotel perks, sometimes housekeeping, gyms, the works. Super convenient, especially when you're fresh off the plane.
Okay, but convenience aside, what kind of damage are we talking to the wallet?
Brace yourself. The guide lays out some average rent costs, and it's definitely a reality check, like a studio in a popular area. Think HK $20,000 a month, and that's before utilities.
Oof, so that's like 2,600 US dollars, give or take.
And if you're after a spacious two-bedroom, you could be looking at double that easy.
Okay, so definitely need a solid financial plan. Which brings us to jobs. What are the odds of actually landing one in this competitive city?
Well, it's a global financial hub, right? So finance and banking, those are big players. But there's also a booming tech scene, lots of fintech, software development roles.
Yeah.
And logistics. Huge. It's a major shipping port, so expertise in supply chain management is gold.
Not just about money and numbers then. And it's amazing. Within each sector, the guide lists so many specific job opportunities. Really highlights the diversity. But there's one recurring theme: networking.
Yeah, that's hammered home throughout the guide. It's Hong Kong, who you know can be as important as what you know. Industry events, professional groups, got to make those personal connections.
There's even this anecdote. Someone landed their dream job just from chatting at a hiking group. Networking can happen anywhere. All right, let's talk getting around. The guide actually paints a pretty positive picture thanks to the MTR.
The mass transit railway, it's a lifesaver. Connects pretty much the whole city, and it's affordable. Like, a single trip can be a couple of dollars up to maybe 50, depends how far you're going.
Not bad at all, considering the city's size. But it's not just the MTR, right? There's those iconic double-decker buses, the trams, and ferries for island hopping.
Options galore. The public transport system here is top-notch.
Oh.
Now, about driving, possible. But be warned, traffic is wild in parking. A nightmare.
Probably stick to public transport then. Good advice. Now, new city, new life can be overwhelming. The guide talks about finding your tribe, connecting with other expats, people who get those unique joys and challenges of Hong Kong life.
So important to have that support system. Online forums, social media groups, local meetups. Tons of ways to connect. Expat communities from all over the world, you're bound to find people who share your interests.
And just having someone who's been there, done that, it makes a world of difference, especially in those first few months. All right, before we wrap up this part, let's talk finances. Hong Kong has this reputation, right? Expensive. And our guide doesn't shy away from that.
Right. Cost of living, gotta be realistic. First thing you'll need, local bank account, HSBC, Standard Chartered, a few others are mentioned, passport, proof of address, sometimes a letter from your employer. That's the usual drill.
Seems straightforward enough, but what about the day-to-day costs? What are the big ones?
Well, we've talked housing. That's a biggie. Then there's food. Getting out all the time adds up fast, especially if you, like me, love trying new things. And transport, though the MTR helps keep that in check.
So budgeting is key.
Yeah.
But silver lining, the guide mentions the tax system is pretty attractive.
Definitely a plus. Income tax capped at 15%, no VAT, no capital gains tax, no inheritance tax.
That's a big deal. Though for our American listeners, the U.S. doesn't have double taxation agreements with Hong Kong. Just something to keep in mind.
Good point.
We've covered a lot. Culture, housing, jobs, transport, finding your community, and even the financial side of Hong Kong.
It's a lot to take in, but it paints a pretty good picture of what to expect.
So before we move to part two, anything standing out to you? What's got you curious?
It's the mix of old and new that gets me, like ancient temples next to skyscrapers, and that culture valuing both tradition and cutting-edge stuff. It's a fascinating blend.
I totally agree. And I'm curious how expats navigate that unique landscape. So stay tuned for part two, where we'll dive deeper into the emotional side of expat life in Hong Kong. The cultural immersion, those unexpected lessons learned. It's going to be good. Welcome back to our Hong Kong adventure. Part one, we covered the basics, visas, finding a place to live, all that good stuff. But this time, we're getting into the heart of it. What's it really like to live in Hong Kong? It's Hong Kong, the emotional edition, if you will.
I like that. And you know what's cool about this guide, Navigating Life as a Hong Kong Asia Expat? It doesn't just give you facts. It's like it hints at the mindset you need to really thrive there. Mindset.
Yeah, like Hong Kong has this ref, right? It's a whirlwind. Exciting, demanding, can be a bit overwhelming. The guide really stresses finding that balance.
That makes sense. Can't just be all work, work, work. Gotta find ways to de-stress, recharge. It's like,
Yeah.
imagine running a marathon through a neon-lit market. Sights are amazing, but gotta pace yourself.
Perfect analogy. And the guide talks about finding your escape. Could be hiking. There's amazing green spaces just outside the city.
I'd be all over that.
Or maybe it's Tai Chi, the art scene. It's about finding those pockets of peace that make Hong Kong feel like home.
And hey, let's not forget, weekend getaways. Hong Kong's location is perfect for that. Hop over to Thailand, Vietnam, even Bali.
Oh yeah, weekend on a beach, then back to the city grind. It's a key point. Hong Kong's not just a city, it's like a launch pad to a whole region.
Love that. But even within the city, I mean, the guide makes it clear boredom is not an option. Museums, temples, those bustling night markets.
Sensory overload in the best way. Okay, I have to bring up the food again. Last time we talked cost, now let's talk pure joy. The guide calls it a feast for the senses, and I'm getting hungry just thinking about it.
Oh, it's more than just delicious food. It's the whole atmosphere. Like those open-air kitchens, woks sizzling, the smell of spices.
It's like a culinary adventure every time you step outside.
Absolutely. And the guide, it makes this point. It's not just about eating, it's experiencing the culture. Sharing a meal, whether it's dim sum with friends or noodles from a street vendor, that's how you connect.
It's like that saying, break bread with someone, you really get to know them. And speaking of connecting, we talked about the expat network, but the guide also highlights engaging with local communities.
Yeah, important distinction.
It's one thing to live in a place, it's another to understand the people, their way of life. How do they suggest going about that?
They recommend being proactive, even in small ways. Learn a few Cantonese phrases, show interest in their customs, go to community events.
Makes you feel less like a visitor, more like you're part of things.
Exactly. It's a two-way street, cultural integration. You give as much as you receive.
So we've got the work-life balance, cultural immersion, food adventures. But what about the everyday stuff? Those little things that can make you smile or maybe trip you up a little.
Right, the nitty-gritty. Well, the guide talks about managing your money wisely. We know Hong Kong can be pricey, so smart choices, right?
Makes sense.
Like, maybe instead of eating out all the time, explore those local markets. Fresh ingredients, way more affordable.
Great tip. The guide also says take advantage of that awesome public transport. Skip the taxis whenever you can.
Definitely. And if budget's tight, shared accommodation saves money, and you meet people.
It's all about finding that balance, enjoying the city, but being smart with your spending. And remember, that low tax system, that helps.
For sure. Although, quick reminder for our American listeners, U.S. doesn't have those double taxation agreements, so factor that in.
Right, important detail. But overall, it sounds like if you're smart about it, the rewards of living in Hong Kong outweigh the costs.
I think so. It's a city that rewards, ambition, a willingness to hustle a bit.
Gotta be on your toes.
Yeah. And even though there'll be challenges, the guide suggests overcoming those. That's part of what makes the experience so enriching.
So, to sum up part two, we've got finding that work-life balance, immersing yourself in the culture, those food adventures, and of course, navigating the financial side. But through it all, this guide keeps coming back to needing a sense of adventure, being open to the unexpected.
Because that's Hong Kong in a nutshell, isn't it? It's constantly throwing you curveballs, challenging your ideas. You got to grow.
It's like personal development boot camp set against a backdrop of neon lights and dim sum. And what strikes me is This whole experience, it sounds incredibly transformative.
I think you're right. Like the guide suggests moving to Hong Kong, it's not just changing your address, it's changing your outlook. You learn to adapt, become more resourceful, see the world differently.
It's almost like hitting the reset button on life.
Hmm.
In a good way, of course. So before we head into part 3, I want to ask you, the listener, a question. What's drawing you to Hong Kong? That fast-paced energy, the mix of cultures, maybe it's just the promise of adventure.
Think about that, because in part 3, we're going deep into what it means to be an expat there. That emotional journey, the unexpected lessons, the impact it can have on your life.
Back again for our final Hong Kong deep dive. We've covered the practical stuff, the exciting stuff, but now, let's get real. What's it feel like to be an expat in this crazy cool city?
Yeah, the emotional side of things.
Exactly. And what I love about our guide, Navigating Life as a Hong Kong Asia Expat, it doesn't just tell you what to do. It hints at those internal shifts that happen when you're somewhere so different.
I see that.
There's this theme of self-discovery, resilience, almost like a little identity transformation. Like you go for the dim sum and the skyline, but you come back a changed person. But picture this. You've just landed, you're excited, prepped. Then reality hits. The energy's intense. Everything's different.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the language barrier is tougher than you thought. How do you handle that initial, whoa, what have I gotten myself into feeling?
Well, the guide, it stresses that feeling a bit lost at first. That's normal, it's new, everything's new. There's that honeymoon phase, then it gets real.
The honeymoon phase.
Maybe you miss home, maybe the city's pace is wearing you down, maybe you just, I don't know, really want a pizza that doesn't have fish on it.
Happens to the best of us. You've got amazing experiences, but then that feeling creeps in. Why am I here? What does the guide say about dealing with those ups and downs?
It comes back to community. Those expat groups, meetups, forums we talked about, they're lifelines. Connecting with people who get it, who felt that same confusion, that homesickness.
It's huge.
Because sometimes you just need to vent, right? Like, I can't find decent cheese anywhere, or I miss walking my dog in a park that isn't surrounded by skyscrapers. And someone's like, yeah, I felt that too, instead of, oh, but Hong Kong is so amazing.
Totally. It validates your
It
experience.
normalizes the struggle, but also helps you find the humor in it. That shared experience, it's bonding, you're figuring it out together.
The city throws you a curveball,
Yep.
and your expat friends are there to help you catch it. But it's more than emotional support, right?
Yeah.
This whole experience, it sounds like it forces you to become more resourceful.
No question. The guide talks about how Hong Kong pushes you out of your comfort zone constantly. Think on your feet, solve problems, navigate things you've never dealt with before, and that builds resilience.
You come out the other side tougher.
Definitely. And the guide makes this point. It's not just practical skills, it's a broader perspective. You start to see things differently. You know, Hong Kong, that East meets West thing, you're always interacting with different cultures, different ways of thinking, makes you question your own assumptions.
You're not in Kansas anymore.
Exactly. That's the magic of living abroad. It expands your worldview. So let's fast forward a bit. You've been in Hong Kong a while, you've found your groove, your people, maybe even your favorite dim sum place.
Now you're talking.
What does the guide say about that sense of belonging? Feeling at home in a place that wasn't initially home?
Good question.
Well, it brings up this interesting point. What does home mean when you've lived in so many places? For a lot of expats, Hong Kong becomes a place of belonging. They've built a life there.
Even if it wasn't where they started.
Yeah. They've made connections, memories, maybe even started a family. And even if they eventually move on, a piece of them stays in Hong Kong.
I can see that. Like you carry those experiences with you wherever you go. You become a citizen of the world.
That's it. And the guide suggests that global citizenship, that's one of the most valuable things you get from this. It opens your mind, builds empathy, makes you feel at home, not just in one place, but everywhere.
Powerful stuff. So as we wrap up our Hong Kong deep dive, I want to bring it back to you listening. What's resonated? Maybe you're suddenly craving char siu bao, or you're thinking, hey, I could learn some Cantonese. Maybe it's just a nudge to get out of your comfort zone.
Whatever it is, we hope this gave you a taste of what it's really like to be an expat in Hong Kong. It's not just about the sights or the food.
It's about the journey, the challenges, the triumphs, the lessons learned, and how, by embracing a new culture, you change a little yourself.
So to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep learning, keep pushing those boundaries. And who knows, maybe someday you'll find yourself navigating those neon-lit streets, dim sum in hand, falling in love with the city that never sleeps.
And if you do, remember, the deep dive will be here, ready for your next adventure. Until then, happy travels.